And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us for the second time today. Thought we'd do a couple of lives anyway today to kind of get everybody set for the MLB trade deadline coming up in about a week and a half. We will be live for you guys all day, starting probably around 8 a.m., maybe a little earlier, depending on how the trades are happening on deadline day, August the 1st. So make sure you stick with us through the entire deadline. Really appreciate all the support we gained last year from it. Gained quite a few subscribers from our content that we did last year. So we're going to be definitely providing quite a bit of content for you guys once again this year. So if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. Hit that like button. Make sure you join us. Follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. You can even find us on Facebook as well, Upside Sports Network. But let's kind of dig into some of the headlines. First and foremost, posted a video about 30 minutes ago kind of detailing the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes as to, the teams that are expected to be interested, teams that actually should be interested anyway, and have a legitimate shot of getting him, as well as what it could possibly cost to get him. So, first and foremost, Shohei Ohtani is probably the most impactful possible addition somebody could make at the trade deadline this year. Sure, there are arms out there like Marcus Stroman, Blake Snell, back end of the bullpen relievers, Josh Hader. You could add a power hitter or something like that to your lineup. But the best hitter all season has been Shohei Ohtani. When you couple that with a frontline starting pitcher that he is, he by far is the most impactful piece anyone can add at this trade deadline season. So, sure, he's a rental player. He technically counts as two, and he's still the best hitter in all of baseball this year. Looking at the teams that are interested in him, well, pretty much everybody. But the teams that have a legitimate chance at him are teams that are going to have the prospect capabilities to trade to the Angels. We looked at 4 of them in our earlier video that we posted. We've told you about the New York Yankees, the San Francisco Giants, kind of on the periphery because they do have the talent if they decide to go that route. Yankees, I think, would have to push that panic button if they were to try to go the Shohei Ohtani trade route because they don't really have that top-end talent that some of the other teams do and still be able to withstand some of the losses that they would have to incur if they brought in Shohei Ohtani. If they brought in Shohei, they'd have to give up Jason Dominguez. They have to give up a couple of their other top prospects, Clark Schmidt as well. This isn't necessarily a formula for winning down the road, in my opinion, because this would gut their future. They don't really have a lot of top-end prospects to work with, and so that's why the Yankees, I think, are probably going to finish 3rd, 4th in the sweepstakes for Shohei Ohtani when you consider the other offers that are likely going to be on the table. The San Francisco Giants, they could offer a number of different assets. They have some really good top-end prospects, but just like the Yankees, they don't really have the depth of the farm system that a couple of the other teams do. There are teams out there in the past, like the Atlanta Braves, who I'm sure would love to add an impact piece like this, but they have gotten rid of their farm system through trade, through promotion. They no longer have the assets to jump in here. But the San Francisco Giants, sure, they could include a guy like Luciano. They could include a Matos. They could include a Harrison. But again, I don't think that's the route they want to go. I think they're going to go towards free agency and try to lure him in that way. Will it be yet another winter where they don't bring in the big fish and disappoint Giants fans again? In my opinion, it sounds like it's going to happen once again, so prepare yourselves, Giants fans. The two teams that I think have the prospect capability to go out there and try to bring in Shohei Ohtani at the trade deadline are the LA Dodgers and the Texas Rangers. Now, take this with a grain of salt. I am a Rangers fan, but just looking at the teams and the prospects that are available, the Rangers really haven't dealt from their prospect depth pretty much the entire season. Sure, they gave up Cole Ragans and a 17-year-old outfielder to bring in Aroldis Chapman. Great trade. He's been fantastic for the Rangers so far, but they still haven't traded any of their upper-level prospects. They haven't traded anybody in their top 10. They still have their young guys that are on the Major League roster already in Ezekiel Duran. They pretty much could go any direction as far as building a trade package for whatever piece they want to go at here at the trade deadline. So for Shohei Ohtani, the LA Dodgers have a number of top-end prospects as well. Maybe not necessarily the guys with a high-end ability or the high-end guys like Ezekiel Duran of the Rangers right now, because he's already proven to be successful in the at the major league level. You look at guys like Jason Dominguez, who probably has a higher ceiling than most of the other players that could be brought back in a trade for Shohei Ohtani. But the Dodgers have kind of a quantity of really high-end quality pieces. Not necessarily at the level of a Jason Dominguez, but maybe one step underneath that. And that, I think, might give them the edge as far as prospect capabilities to be able to bring in, say, 4 of those guys and say, hey, we're going to trade you guys to the Angels for Shohei Ohtani, and their prospect system will still be just fine without those 4 pieces. Got some other videos coming out tomorrow to kind of detail some of the packages that they could offer, but the Dodgers, I think, are going to be right there. The question will be, they are probably going to be considered the front runner to bring in Shohei Ohtani. Just from a financial standpoint, they could bring in Shohei and, they reset their clock this year as far as the tax is concerned. That's part of the reason why they didn't bring back Trey Turner. They've been paring down the roster a little bit. So this is kind of the time where they will then push forward and try to spend some money in this free agency period. Do they decide to hold on to their prospects and spend in the offseason? Or do they decide to go ahead and make a push for the World Series this year? Remains to be seen. I think the Dodgers, if I were in the Dodgers' shoes, I would try to have my cake and eat it too. Try to hold on to my prospects, try to push myself towards the World Series this year by penny-ante around the edges of the roster. We've seen them being interested in guys like Mark Canha of the Mets, Tommy Pham, Kike Hernandez of the Red Sox. They're playing on ESPN right now on Sunday Night Baseball. But those would be kind of the trades I would do if I'm a Dodgers fan. I would try to hold on to my prospects, and sure, Ohtani would be a great piece for this year. But then I'm losing even more of my future when I've seen more and more of that future get eaten away in the past couple of years. So I would try to really hard to hold on to those prospects if at all possible. Now, on the other hand, having your cake and eating it too, then in free agency, you can go out to Shohei Ohtani and say, hey, how does $60 million a year for 10 years sound? That's $600 million. I don't think he'll get a contract quite that high, although I think we're going to get very close to it. So we'll see what he ultimately gets in free agency. But I think if I'm the Dodgers front office, I would try to build around the edges, maybe even get some controllable players if I decide to trade some of my prospects. But Shohei Ohtani would certainly be the biggest impact they could do for this season and this postseason chase. But if they do that, they run the risk of, one, souring their relationship with Shohei, and then now they don't have the prospect. Shohei says, hey, I didn't really like it there with the Dodgers, and he goes elsewhere. But we'll see which way the Dodgers ultimately decide to go. The Texas Rangers aspect of it, save them for last anyway, just because I believe they are the team best positioned to make any trade during this trade deadline season. Why? As I mentioned, they have Major League ready talent already on the roster that they could deal. I don't expect them to trade Josh Young, but if the right piece came along, who's to say they wouldn't? But I think they would much rather trade a guy like Ezekiel Duran, a player who's having about a 300 average season right now, really high value player, can play pretty much anywhere on the diamond. Second base, third base, shortstop, first base, left field, right field, DH. You want him to come off the bench, he can do that. Not saying you want him to do that, obviously, if he's hitting 300. But I'm saying that's how versatile Ezekiel Duran is. He can literally pretty much play anywhere aside from maybe center field and catcher. Outside of that, you can plug him in. He could be a 300 hitter for you in your lineup right now. And that's the biggest difference between all these other prospects you're going to talk about from all these other teams. He's proven it at the major league level that he can be successful there. These other guys still haven't proven that they could hit double A pitching, that they could hit triple A pitching, that they could hit major league pitching as well, let alone hit 300. Ezekiel Duran has done that this year. That's why I think the Rangers could really build a very unique package compared to the other teams here at the trade deadline. Now let's say the Rangers say, hey, I don't really want to tinker with my major league club. I'd rather deal with some of the prospects who aren't already on my roster. Then you go to the AAA level, you're talking about guys like Evan Carter, you're talking about guys like Owen White. Those are high-value prospects. Evan Carter's probably going to be your everyday center fielder or left fielder for the Texas Rangers. We'll see what ultimately happens with him. I don't think they want to move him. I think they'd rather move some other smaller, lower-level prospects, if you will. Guys like Aaron Zavala, guys like Franklin Gutierrez, guys like Justin Foscue, just to name a few of their hitters. On the pitching side, we mentioned Owen White. He's probably going to make the start against Houston, the second game of that series coming up on Tuesday. That's going to be a very unique game for him. Might be the one time the Rangers really can see him against a division rival and see whether or not they want to go ahead and hold on to him as a key rotation piece for the future, or if they view this as an opportunity to strike it rich right now and try to push for a World Series. By the way, the Rangers still have yet to win one World Series as a franchise, so I understand Jacob deGrom is out, but now is the time to really push forward. This team is having an unprecedented season, and they really need that horse to kind of get them the rest of the way. I think we're kind of seeing the edges of this team need a little bit of a rest, and so bringing in somebody to rejuvenate this core just a little bit might be exactly what the doctor ordered. But say a team wants to go with more lottery tickets, guys who aren't necessarily ready for the big leagues, that are maybe not just a couple months away from the major leagues, but maybe somebody who's 2-3 years down the line. They have plenty of prospects as far as that's concerned as well. Brock Porter, probably their best arm in the lower levels of the minors. Remember, they got him in the 4th round of the draft, not this year, but last year. Kumar Rocker was their first-round selection. The money they used to save in his signing anyway, they used that and brought in Brock Porter, the best high school arm in the draft that year, and he's certainly proven that with the Texas Rangers so far. Maybe you want a guy like Sebastian Walcott, a high upside guy, somebody who's absolutely tearing the cover off the ball right now in the minor leagues. He looks like he's going to be a superstar level player once he reaches the big leagues, but again, it's 17 years old. This is a future play for you, so you can't necessarily say he's the one piece you're going to get back, but maybe you can certainly say he's one of the key pillars in a trade. So that's why I think the Texas Rangers are the best positioned team to make any trade here at the trade deadline. Earlier today, we discussed some of the other teams that are probably going to sell this year. We talked about the New York Mets, other side. The New York Mets, anyway, about Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer. Right now, they're losing 6-1. Looks like they're going to fall even further behind in the standings right now after Sunday Night Baseball. We talked about the Chicago Cubs and the pieces they have to sell here at the deadline. Marcus Stroman, Cody Bellinger, among others. Maybe even a Kyle Hendricks could be on the market. St. Louis Cardinals have a wide range of chances that they have here at the trade deadline. If they want to trade away rental guys, they have that. Bullpen, they have that. Starting pitching, Miles Mikolas, Jordan Montgomery, Flaherty, they have that as well. You want a cornerstone of your franchise? Nolan Arenado's there if you really want to pay the piper for him. Goldschmidt is the guy I would rather trade out of those two because he only has 2 years after this one left on his contract, and he's a little bit older of a player. So that might be the one guy if you really need an impact first base DH type. He might be the guy that you want to go for at this deadline season if Shohei Ohtani is not to your liking. So there's a lot of opportunities here at the trade deadline. Some results came in from today, obviously. The Seattle Mariners lost their game today. I don't think they're going to be a buyer here at the deadline. We had a couple of our viewers mention Logan Gilbert in our first chat about him possibly being a trade deadline acquisition for a team. Maybe a team, the commenter anyway, mentioned the Cardinals as being a fit to where they could buy and sell at the trade deadline. Bring in Gilbert while sending out somebody else. That could be an option for them. But again, there's a lot of opportunities here at the trade deadline. So let's kind of dig in on some of the standings right now. There we go. So as you guys can see, Baltimore still leads the East. Texas in the West. Minnesota won a long one there today against the White Sox anyway, pretty much putting the finishing touches on the White Sox season in my opinion. White Sox just look absolutely listless right now, and they're going to be a team that's going to sell. But that's kind of your 1, 2, 3 anyway in the American League. The wild card teams, Tampa's been great all year, fallen on some hard times lately. Houston, they're going to need some starting pitching. We talked a little bit about Dylan Cease in the first chat, along with Marcus Stroman will touch on a few other starting pitchers as well. JG, welcome in. I know you would like to see Marcus Stroman ultimately end up in Houston. I would also like to see Robertson or Bednar. I don't think you have the ability to bring in a Bednar, but Robertson is a lot more gettable than a Bednar would be for the Houston Astros. So Robertson's having a great year. He would be a great piece for them. Bellinger is out of our price range. Same with Cease and Luis Robert Jr. I agree. I think the White Sox ultimately will hold on to Cease and Robert Jr., but Bellinger, I think, is gettable. Do I think that he's going to go to the Houston Astros? No. I think there's other teams out there that are going to outbid the Houston Astros for him. He's having a resurgent year. You're looking at teams that might be able to re-sign him as well, having a little bit of a leg up in the negotiations for Cody Bellinger. So kind of keep that in mind whenever you're trying to figure out, where could these guys ultimately end up. The teams that are outside of the playoff picture looking in. The New York Yankees top that list right now, 2 games back. Boston, 2.5. They're about to close within 2 right now because they're playing on Sunday Night Baseball and beating the Mets. So they'll essentially be tied with the Yankees after today's play. The LA Angels won again today. They are 6-4 in their last 10. They played better baseball this year than they have in years past, but I don't think it's enough to be able to get into the postseason. Do I think they should sell here at the deadline? I think they should. I still think they could do a little bit of buying and selling here. For instance, if they did trade Shohei Ohtani, bringing in a guy like Ezekiel Duran could at least replace some of the production of a guy like Shohei Ohtani in their lineup. And then depending on what they decide to do, maybe they decide to go out there and get in the market for a guy like Blake Snell or something like that, where they still capitalize on the value of Ohtani, bring in 5, 6 high-level prospects, rebuild their farm system, really get them something going for the future, and then turn around and bring in a lower-cost option at the deadline to kind of build out their rotation as they try to push for a playoff spot. Angels could do a little bit of both, but I think it'd be foolish of them to not take all options seriously when it comes to Ohtani, just because he's such a valuable piece and there's so much uncertainty about him even considering going back to the Angels. He pretty much for the better part of like 2 years now, we've been talking about how he wants to win. He continues to to have that as his main focus. And it just hasn't happened with the Angels, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen this year. Sure, they could try to push for the final wild card spot, but if they don't get it, you miss out on Ohtani. He leaves. You don't get anything back for him. That's really a dark future for you guys if you guys are an Angels fan. So if I'm an Angels fan, as good as a player as he is, as kind of a unique player as he is, I would go ahead and try to push the button and try to trade Shohei Ohtani here at the deadline. Welcome in, Andres. To be honest, Angels are not forced to trade Ohtani. Angels are 4 back and could get Ohtani help plus get some bullpen. I get the optimism. I do. The Angels are better than they have been in recent memory. Ohtani is the best player in all of baseball as far as this year is concerned, especially offensively. But even with the best offensive player in all of baseball, as good as he has been, you're still, tied for 3rd in the division? You're 4 games back of the wild card? I wouldn't say your team is, forced to go one way or the other, but I'm saying that you're not necessarily guaranteed a spot for a wild card either. And so to think that you're going to get it just because you have Shohei, just because you have Mike Trout, if they add around the periphery, how many times have we seen this tale come from the Angels year in and year out? Oh yeah, we're going to be contenders. And how many times have they fallen on their face over the last, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years now with Mike Trout? And now Mike Trout is starting to fall back a little bit in his career. Shohei is obviously the best player on the team right now. And you still can't get it done? You're still 4 games back of the last wild card after they added a spot to the postseason, and you're still 4 games back? I get the optimism. 4 games back. Woohoo, let's push for it. Let's try to get to the postseason. But come on, man. At some point, you have to take things, with all seriousness as to where you actually stand. And Shohei Ohtani has told you he wants to win. We saw what the experience meant to him with the World Baseball Classic, how important it was for him to win. And the Angels just haven't won. And if they don't get to the postseason, you're literally pushing your chips to the center for a guy that probably could leave. If you don't make the postseason, he probably will leave. So I get the optimism for being 4 back, but you have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here to get 5, 6 high-quality premium assets to your franchise that don't give you 2 months of service control, that could give you 6 years of control on their roster. Just food for thought, my friend. Welcome in, UK. I have no idea what's going on or even know how to part with the internet, but let's go Beavers. Okay. Sarah, DeYoung needs to go. I'm thinking Dodgers or Red Sox or Fitz. I don't think the Red Sox are a fit. Trevor Story is going to be coming back. They're actually looking at possibly moving a guy like Kike Hernandez because they're not going to have a spot for a shortstop on their roster. So that's why they're thinking about possibly moving some of their veterans on their roster because they have too many right now. DeYoung will give them another option at short, etc., that they could use. So Red Sox I don't think are a fit. Dodgers, sure, I could see that. But we mentioned at the top how Shohei Ohtani probably is the most impactful piece here at the deadline. If you're the Dodgers fan, if you don't want to go the Shohei route and give up the prospects, maybe you go the route of rental options. Maybe you go the route of a DeYoung, something like that, something smaller to try to make this team a little bit better, a little bit more well-balanced. Something like that could make a lot of sense, Sarah. So I agree with you on that one. Just to kind of finish out where the rest of the standings are, I think pretty much the Angels down should consider themselves at least on the borderline of playoff contention or sellers. The only reason why I say that is because Cleveland is only a few games back of a division crown anyway, and so we'll see what ultimately happens with them. Seattle, they've lost too many pieces for this year. I don't think they have the horses to be able to get it done. Detroit, as good as a year as they've had, a surprising year as they've had, they're still 9 games under 500. They should not be pushing their pieces to the center. Welcome in, Jordan. Yeah, glad to be back as well. Got awful at pitching. Well, it's the inconsistent pitching more than anything else, Sarah. I think they get one good outing and then the next outing that's not so good. They get 5 good innings of work and then the 6th inning they give up 5, 6, 7, 8 runs. That's the issue with the Cardinals this year. So it's been a very un-Cardinal-like year, to put it mildly. Andres, if you see yourself, the standings, Boston, Yankees, Toronto could get on losing streaks, plus they're not that great. Okay, I'm not worried about the Yankees, Boston, etc. in front of them. They have to beat Toronto, Tampa Bay, Houston. I don't think they're leapfrogging Houston. They're going to be right up there. And Texas and Houston to me are pretty much guaranteed playoff spots at this point. It's just how much are they really willing to invest to try to make it to the World Series this year. Tampa Bay, sure they're struggling lately, 3-7. You can't tell me right now Tampa Bay is a worse team than the LA Angels, even with their struggles. So I guess your opportunity here would be Toronto. Toronto's had a terrible starting rotation, starting with Alex Manoah, his struggles that he's had. He's certainly started to bounce back, and this lineup is starting to find a way. 6-4 in their last 10. Angels 6-4 in their last 10. Sure, they could start to lose a couple of games here or there. If the Yankees decide to push their chips to the center and go out there and add at the deadline here, I don't think you're leapfrogging the Yankees either. Boston, I didn't think would be this good, but they've proven to be very good so far this year. I think the Angels are going to finish just outside of the playoff race, but in either event, even if you're considering yourselves to be a contender this year, even if you're considering yourselves to be on the precipice of pushing for that wild card spot, I still think you'd have to trade Shohei just because of the sheer value he has in this marketplace. 5, 6 prospects coming back, 6 years of control for all of these younger players that you're bringing back for 2 months of Shohei Ohtani. Just something I think the Angels probably should have thought of a couple of years ago. They pushed it all the way to the end right now, and if they lose Shohei for nothing, sorry Angels fans, it's going to be very bleak for your future. Used to be cheesy guy. Yeah, okay. I know this is off topic. Should Trout ask for a trade since the Angels aren't winning? I know he's hurt. Ohtani is leaving. I do think Ohtani probably will leave after the season, especially if they don't make it to the postseason. I still think even if they did get to a wild card spot, if they got bounced in the first round, I still think it's highly likely Ohtani leaves. But as far as a Trout requesting a trade, I don't think he'll ever ask for a trade. One of the most loyal guys in the entire sport. I think they could go 0-162, and Mike Trout would still go, all right, we'll get him next year, guys. That's the type of loyalty Mike Trout has for the LA Angels. So do I think he should ask for a trade if they aren't winning? Possibly. Do I think he will? Absolutely not. Jose, welcome back. This trade deadline is going to be wild and crazy. I agree. I think this is probably going to be one of the most active trade deadlines we've seen, at least in the last 5 years. A lot of teams that haven't been perennial winners over the last 5, 6 years, thinking of the Cincinnati Reds, the Arizona Diamondbacks, Texas Rangers, a lot of teams are higher in the standings this year than what we would have thought, and they're trying to push their chances for playoff contention a little bit further forward. So you think of the success the Cincinnati Reds have had with Ellie De La Cruz. They're trying to capitalize on that. We thought they might be selling pieces here at the trade deadline, not trying to buy. Well, they certainly will add here at the deadline. Brewers are going to probably do a little bit of add and subtract here at the deadline. What they decide to do with their 2024-2025 free agent class anyway. Corbin Burns, Woodruff, and Adames. What they do with a resurgent Yelich is all up for grabs here at the deadline, so we'll see what they do. That's going to be one of the more underrated stories here at the deadline, is what the Brewers ultimately decide to do. Gausman, Bassett, Barrios, Kikuchi has been a great rotation. Well, they got the pieces in there as far as Gausman, Bassett. I really like those two at the top of the rotation. Kikuchi and Barrios can be hit or miss. I just wonder how they're all going to perform in the second half of the season. So if you're a Blue Jays fan, it's nice to have Alex Manoah starting to perform a little bit better than he did in the first half of the season. I just wonder if they want to add one more piece to that rotation. It's going to be curious to see what the Blue Jays ultimately decide to do. They don't necessarily have the trade pieces that they did, say, a year or 2 years ago, but they certainly have enough to be able to add around the periphery of this team once again. The Yankees should go after Bellinger or Carlson. As much as I do love Carlson, we need pitching. They could use a corner outfielder. I agree there. They could use some consistent performance out of that outfield just from a availability standpoint as well. But I just wonder what they ultimately decide to do. What does Cashman decide to do here at the deadline? Does he get a little desperate and shove all of his chips into the center and go after Shohei? Does he try to add Carlson, sell off some of the smaller pieces on the roster, an IKF, etc.? Do they add another catcher with the loss of Jose Trevino for the season? Another piece to be to keep your eye out for is what they decide to do with their catcher spot. Do you see Juan Soto, the Phillies? Phillies are trying to keep Harper at first base permanently. I think the way their roster is currently constructed, Harper could stay at first base. Rhys Hoskins, I can't remember if he's going to be back in time for the postseason or not, but in either event, I think they would like to try to save Harper as much as they could. As for the Juan Soto aspect of this, I don't think there's any chance Juan Soto moves here at the deadline. I think that's more of an off-season question for the San Diego Padres. I think they're going to try to sell Blake Snell and Josh Hader here at the deadline, maybe another piece or two on that roster. But the big pieces, the franchise cornerstones of that roster, guys like Xander Bogaerts, guys like Manny Machado, Juan Soto, those are bigger, foundational questions for the organization that will have to be answered in the off season. So for right now, for those of you wondering, what can you pick off of the carcass of the Padres? I think it'd be Josh Hader, probably be the first option I would go for. He's probably going to come with the least cost because he is a reliever on a rental option. On a rental, contract anyway. But Snell could probably command a little bit more just because he's a starting pitcher. And a lot of teams out there, like the Reds, like the Diamondbacks, teams that haven't been in the playoffs in recent memory, are certainly going to be trying to get that, best starter on the market type of player. Snell has been very good over the last, 2-3 months anyway. You look at Marcus Stroman, another guy that's at the top of the market. Dylan Cease, but I don't see him being moved. Those are the guys at the top of the market who could be moved. Lucas Giolito has been connected with the Arizona Diamondbacks as well. They are going to be buyers at this year's deadline. Would not have thought that at the beginning of the year. Would have thought they would have tried to sold pieces around the edges of this roster. Maybe some of their outfield glut that are their glut of outfielders that they would have had, they could have moved here at the deadline. But it seems like they're going to try to add some pieces rather than subtract. So we'll see what options they ultimately decide to go with. The rest of this American League teams that you could see selling here. Kansas City Royals already started that with Aroldis Chapman. They don't really have much else beyond that. Maybe Barlow, I guess, to sell. He ain't going to come with a high cost, though. And then the Oakland A's, pretty much if you're interested in it, give them a call. They'll probably give it to you for, something. The Oakland A's really don't have much to sell. Rooker, their first baseman, is probably the only high-value piece that they could move. On the NL side, top three, Braves, Dodgers, and Brewers. We talked a little bit about the Brewers possibly going one way or the other, or possibly even both directions, because of the contract situations around Burns, Woodruff, and Adames, not to mention the resurgence of Yelich. Maybe they decide to cash in on that and get off of his contract right now, so that way they can try to re-sign all three of those players this off-season. Cincinnati Reds, obviously having a great season. They're on a 5-game win streak. 9 games above 500 right now, so we'll see what they decide to do here at the deadline. I think they will add a starting pitcher, maybe somebody of the Lance Lynn type, somebody who's not going to cost them a whole lot of prospect capital and allows them to keep their momentum going while showing the team that they do believe in them to be able to at least win one of those wild card spots. Diamondbacks are going to add a starter. We touched a little bit about the options on there. The Giants are looking at Justin Verlander as well. So a lot of starting pitching needs among these wild card teams. So keep your eyes peeled for which starting pitcher on the market ultimately goes to which team. Did I watch the Hall of Fame ceremony today? I caught a little bit of it here and there. Watched a little bit of McGriff and Roland's speeches anyway. Really happy to see Crime Dog finally get into the Hall of Fame. Absolutely deserving. You see all the the debate about compilers versus high peak type players. Roland is definitely one of the more compiler category type player. He was still a very good defensive third baseman as well. He was consistent year in and year out for such a long period of time. Did you ever consider him necessarily a star player? Probably not. Did you always consider him one of the top 5, third baseman, top 6 third baseman in the entire game every single year he played? Pretty much. And is he one of the best defensive third basemen the game has ever seen, at least up until all the ones that are retired right now? Yes. So, and third base is definitely a position that's been underrepresented in the Hall of Fame as of right now. Anyway, even with his induction, there's still far fewer third basemen than should actually be in the Hall of Fame. We're probably going to get another one next year in Adrian Beltre. There's a few more coming down the pike that probably will get Hall of Fame nods, but I think both of them really deserved it. Fred McGriff should have been in 10, 15 years ago. I mean, the man was a Hall of Famer when he retired, period. Roland, I think, had to go through the process to finally get in, and he deserved it. So both of them, well-deserved. Congratulations, and we'll see what ultimately happens the next time Hall of Fame voting comes around, and how many times we have to continue to talk about the guys who had PED stuff, had steroids attached to their names, those kinds of things. And I just wish baseball would finally come up with a solution for those guys so we don't have to continue to drag baseball through the mud of those dark years when they had, the Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds issues. Now we have to rehash it every single Hall of Fame discussion. So I just hope baseball comes up with a solution for that. We still see the Pete Rose discussion. I get that part of the discussion, why we continue to have that one. But I think Pete Rose probably is going to not get into the Hall of Fame while he is alive anyway. Maybe at some point after he passes, maybe something will happen with the next commissioner. But as things stand right now, he's not getting in with Manfred as the man. So the Hall of Fame takes its cues from Major League Baseball, and they're going to take their cue here. He will not get into the Hall of Fame. The bigger question becomes, what is Major League Baseball ultimately going to decide to do for the Hall of Fame guys as far as the Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, all that discussion. So we'll see what happens there. But to kind of continue with our trade deadline discussion, the wild card spots in the National League are certainly up for grabs. I believe Philadelphia is right there. Miami's certainly had their rough stretch over the last couple of weeks, but seems like they might have shaken out of it today. Philadelphia is going to add here at the deadline. Curious to see what they decide to do. There was some discussion about them being interested in a guy like Nolan Arenado. I don't think they'll be able to pull it off. I think the St. Louis Cardinals would much rather hold on to him than trade him to Philadelphia, even if Philadelphia had the pieces that they could, or that would be able to represent a representative offer, if you will, to the Cardinals. I just don't think they have the pieces, and I don't think the Cardinals want to move him. So I think will add, but we'll see if they do something a lot like what they did last year on the periphery with Noah Syndergaard, etc. But the Cubs are probably the first of the sellers on the National League side. While they're 5.5 games out, I don't think they have a legitimate shot to push towards the postseason. We talked a little bit about Stroman and Bellinger already. Kyle Hendricks is another piece I would be interested in if I were other teams looking for starting pitching. He has pedigree as far as postseason success. You look at his repertoire, something that would bode well in the postseason as well. So we'll see what the Cubs ultimately decide to do when it comes to Kyle Hendricks. San Diego Padres 6 games back, a little bit higher in the standings anyway than the Mets, but they really have nothing going for themselves. Even the team kind of feels it around the roster right now. Joe Musgrove mentioned earlier this year how they're kind of surprised with all the difficulties that they've had. Xander Bogaerts expressed his frustrations earlier this year in a loss to the Washington Nationals. Kind of saying, hey, come on, guys, we're losing to the freaking Nationals. Like, how bad is this going to get? Now, every dog has their day. Baseball has a lot of parity. You're not going to win 162 games. But they've certainly struggled a lot more than I think anybody on the outside expected them to. Even Dodgers fans who hate the Padres would tell you they probably expected more out of the Padres this year. I think if you flip-flop the standings for Arizona and San Diego, I think that's what we all expected before the season began. But as things stand right now, you're 4 games behind, or 4 games under 500, 6 out of the wild card. And I just don't think you're going to have the horses to be able to get it done. I mean, you did bring in Xander Bogaerts. You thought that was going to be the big acquisition that you were going to need to push you over the top. And while he's been good, other pieces in your lineup haven't necessarily been as good. Manny Machado hasn't been as good. Tatis has been hit or miss at times. Soto's had his ups and downs. This team just can't seem to get out of their own way. And so that's why I think we're going to see Hader be moved here at the deadline to try to recoup some of that prospect capital. Same thing for Blake Snell. New York Mets, as I mentioned, we're losing here to the Boston Red Sox, and they're 7 games out right now of a wild card spot. They have tons of pieces on this roster that could be fits on other postseason eligible clubs anyway. So you look at guys at the back end of the bullpen, David Robertson, Adam Ottavino, Brooks Raley. Those are some pieces that could move in the bullpen to try to rebuild some of that prospect core. Then Steve Cohen anyway. Steve Cohen certainly has the pieces that he would have in the offseason, then trade for whatever pieces he wants, in addition to adding payroll like he did this offseason. But clearing the books right now probably be a good move for the Mets to try to clear the decks and see what you have to build with for next year anyway. Let Beatty get some at-bats, let Vientos get some at-bats, and really see what you have going forward. But you look at Max Scherzer, you look at Justin Verlander, those are the 2 starting pieces that you could move here at the deadline. If I'm an outsider wanting one of those pieces on my roster, I'd rather have Justin Verlander than Max Scherzer, just because we've seen Scherzer break down in back-to-back postseasons now with the Dodgers and Mets. So I'd be a little leery about bringing in a Max Scherzer, but maybe he recaptures some of that youth. Maybe he has another great run in the postseason, puts a team on his back like he did with the Washington Nationals. But Verlander, if I had to pick between the two, not saying that both are great options. They do come with hefty salaries, but the Mets seem to be willing to eat most of that salary, if not all of it, in order to get back some high-quality prospects. So we'll see what options the Mets ultimately decide to go with. I think they could sell some of the rental guys, the guys like at the back end of the roster, the Cannas, the Phams, Vogelbachs of the world, that type of a player, and try to go with some of their core and try to stick with that and see if they can add after the season. But Mets, I think, are in a tough spot right now. I don't see them having a path forward. I think the teams in front of them are going to stay the teams in front of them, and I think they should ultimately decide to sell. The one interesting piece that they do have that hasn't played yet this year is Edwin Diaz. He started throwing anyway. He's throwing 150 foot off of flat ground. He's probably a good month away from baseball, from being able to come back. I would say probably a month and a half. You might get him back on the best case scenario side, maybe a couple weeks into September. Worst case scenario, he's out for the entire year, and you have to stick with him for 5 more years of that contract if he doesn't heal up. But say the Mets want to save $20 million a year, they want to go ahead and offload that contract and see what they can do from there. Diaz could be a piece that's available here at the deadline. You won't know what he has as far as health until well after the deadline, so it'll already be a sunk cost. But teams that could use some relief help might want the best pitcher in the entire game from last year in Edwin Diaz. So kind of keep your eyes peeled for what the Mets decide to do with that roster. I think a lot of that money probably will be coming off of that roster by the end of the season. We talked a lot about the Cardinals already. We'll touch on them a little bit more on their starting pitching more than anything else. Guys like Flaherty, Michaelis, Montgomery, all could be had here at the deadline. Flaherty probably has the most value of the 3, but the Cardinals have had inconsistent pitching performances, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. When you're looking for a starting pitcher, these guys are part of that problem. Why the Cardinals have not been as good is because these guys have not been consistent. And sure, you can hope for better things. Sure, you could hope for, hey, you're maybe better defense behind him will make him better. That classic argument, or maybe just a change of scenery. We've seen those things happen year after year. Maybe you're in that camp. Maybe you just need a number 5 starter to get you through until your other guys get healthy, whatever the case may be. But those are the guys that are available from the out of the rotation of the Cardinals. But take it with a grain of salt. They aren't exactly aces that are going to pitch Game 1 of your postseason series. I think next year's Hall will have 4 to 6 new members. I think it'll probably have about 4 or 5. 6 is a ton to add to any Hall of Fame class, but we'll see what ultimately ends up happening. Check out the schedule for Toronto, Yankees, and Red Sox. I saw their schedule, and the Angels should have that wild card spot. Great job. Well, let's go ahead and look at some of the schedules. look at their schedule here. I don't really put a lot of stock into, a team's schedule one way or the other, mainly because you play each team at a different time of the year. So just looking at the schedule, we'll go ahead and do this for you, Andres, just to kind of see where they're at. They play at Toronto here coming up anyway. They've got at Detroit. They've got at Atlanta coming up here at the end of the month. In August, you've got Seattle at home, Giants at home. Then you go on the road for Houston and Texas. You play the Rays. You play the Reds. You play the Mets, the Phillies. Most of these teams are still in playoff contention. Let's look at September just to see if its schedule gets easy in September. A's, that's good for you. Orioles are probably the best team in the American League right now. Guardians are going to be fighting for for either a division crown or a wild card spot. You're going to go at Seattle, a long distance trip, obviously. Any team that goes to Seattle, even from California, is still a long distance trip. Every team that goes to Seattle is long distance. You play at home against Detroit. That's probably a win for you guys. Then you play a couple of first place teams currently. Rangers and Twins. Rays are going to be one of the most competitive teams out there as well. And then you finish with the A's. So, I mean, you do get the A's, so I'll give you that one. But beyond that, I don't know. Looks pretty much like a standard schedule would. They got a lot of good teams coming up on them as well. So we'll see what ultimately happens. Bob Nightingale reported that the Cards would be willing to move Contreras at the deadline. Shocking. Contreras has not been fit with the club since pretty much April, when they decided to bench him pretty much for an entire week because he wasn't getting on the right page with the pitching staff, so they thought he was the problem with why their pitchers were having such an inconsistent year. I understand Yadi Molina is great for them. I get that. But you're saying the catcher is that responsible for the struggles of your pitching staff? Obviously, they realized they couldn't just DH him all the time, so they put him back behind the plate, and here we are. Well, let's look at the Toronto Yankees and Red Sox schedule. It's going to be heavily with the American League East. Let's go ahead and pull up the schedule for them. Just to finish out this month, they got at Houston, at New York. They play the Marlins, all three of them pushing for playoff spots. Then they play at Detroit. They play the Cardinals, which are going to be selling here. This will be after the deadline, so the Cardinals have already sold some of their better pieces. They play the Guardians, a playoff contender team. The Giants, a playoff contender team. Then they play your Angels at LA. They play Colorado. They play the Yankees at home, the Marlins in Miami. We got the Jays, Red Sox. So pretty much the same type of schedule as the Angels. Not really seeing anything too life-altering for them either. Let's look at the Yankee schedule. Yankees could be a team that pushes everything to the center. They're going to have a tough schedule, though. They're going to play the Mets, Orioles, and Rays to wrap up this month. They got Houston, White Sox after they've already sold their pieces. Play the Braves, the Marlins. Red Sox are going to be a tough out anyway right now, as it currently stands. Nationals are a gimme. Tampa Bay, Detroit. They play 4 games at Detroit. More Tigers here. Really like the Yankees schedule. They're going to be playing at Pittsburgh after they've sold their pieces. And they got a couple of tough ones here with Blue Jays, Diamondbacks, and then at Kansas City. So I don't understand your argument here as far as the schedule. Let's look at the Red Sox. To me, these schedules are all about the same. So far, the Yankees look like they've had the easiest one of them. Let's look at Boston just to kind of wrap up this month. They just beat the Mets. Uh, let's see. They got the Braves, Giants, and Mariners next. Blue Jays, Royals, Tigers, Nationals. Then they got the Yankees, Astros, Dodgers, Astros again. That's a tough stretch for Boston between probably the last couple weeks anyway of August. Let's check out their September schedule. Kansas City, Tampa, Orioles, Yankees, Blue Jays, Rangers, White Sox. Pretty tough competition for the Red Sox. So I'll give you the Red Sox probably have a little tougher schedule anyway than the Angels. But I'm not counting Boston, never have counted Boston as a postseason threat. But just to kind of wrap up the schedule discussion, you'll notice a lot of these schedules are maybe 2 or 3 games different as far as quality of opponent over one or the other. That's why I don't put a whole lot of talking or stock into the schedule making, at least until the final 3 weeks of the season. At that point, then we'll see where the standings are and who has a more favorable schedule, who's hot, who's not at that time. But you know, middle of July, I don't care what their schedule is in September. They got to play the games in front of them, and they got to win. Period. All of those teams do. Pitching coach is garbage. He has no experience. That would explain it. Plus, Marmol is not a good manager. He needs to go. Well, I mean, it's the Cardinals' way. It's the front office that chose to go with Marmol, that chose to go with the younger pitching coach, that chose to move on from Mike Maddox. I don't think the decision to bring in Marmol in the first place was the right move. I thought they should have stuck with what they had success with, but the front office wanted to do things their way, and for the first time ever, the Cardinals front office seems to be doing more of the coaching than the actual coaches on the field, and that's been different than any other Cardinals team that we've seen in the past. We've seen the Cardinals on the field product, high quality defense, high quality at bats, doing the right thing the right way. You hear about people talk about the Patriot way in football. The Cardinals were kind of that in baseball, just a consistent model of winning. Then the front office looks like they've tried to meddle a little too much, and this is what you got. But let's go back to our standings here, and then we'll get into some of the rumors that are out there. There we go. All right, so let's go all the way to the top here. Check in on some of the latest rumors. We talked a little bit about the Boston Red Sox are going to have a little bit of a glut of too many players anyway when Trevor Story gets back, among others. That's why they're possibly looking to trade some of their shorter-term contracts, try to add around the periphery. Think about the team that won back in the early teens, say about 10 years ago anyway. That was a team that added a little bit here and there around the periphery of that team. Brought in a Mike Napoli, brought in an Ian Kinsler, added, short-term guys, locker room guys to help build up some of that younger prospect base that they had at the time, that young team. And they were able to get all the way through to the postseason. That's what the Red Sox are looking to do. So as it relates to the trade deadline, you look at teams like the Los Angeles Dodgers, who have a history with guys like Kike Hernandez. That's something that could work here at the deadline. So keep your eyes peeled for the Red Sox both buying and selling at the deadline from their surplus, trading away some of those middle infielders, adding maybe to that starting pitching group, maybe adding a reliever, something along those lines is what could happen for the Red Sox here at the deadline. But doesn't look like they're going to sell Kenley Jansen. I thought he might be one of the pieces that would have been available here at the deadline at the beginning of the season, but Boston's played better than I would have thought, and it looks like he's going to stay in Boston at least through the rest of this season. Got a video coming out tomorrow about the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes, about what it's going to cost to actually get him. First video that's going to be talking about the New York Yankees and what it could cost for them to be able to bring him in. We talked a little bit about it in our first live today, about them having to include Jason Dominguez, having to include two more of their top prospects in addition to Dominguez, adding Clark, pieces like that, basically gutting the top end of that farm system that really doesn't have much depth behind there. That's kind of the all-in move for Brian Cashman and the New York Yankees. Do they decide to go that route, or do they decide to go more of the quantity route like they did with the Joey Gallo trade, trading away guys like Ezekiel Duran, Josh Smith, all these other players in that deal, Glenn Otto, Trevor Hauver, That's a lot of quantity that the Rangers got from it, and that's why Ezekiel Duran right now is probably the biggest trade chip that could go in the Shohei Ohtani talks. Now, think about what you would have had if you didn't make that trade for Joey Gallo and do the quantity route in that trade for Joey Gallo if you're the New York Yankees. If you had just given up some of the better, higher-end prospects that ultimately didn't work out on your roster ultimately, maybe you would have still had Ezekiel Duran on this team and really be able to solve your corner outfield bat already. Maybe that would have been a better route for you guys. But as things stand, you're going to have to include Dominguez. You're going to have to include a couple more guys. You're going to have to include Clark. And I just don't think the Yankees are going to want to push all their chips to the center on a year where they've struggled with injury. They've struggled to keep struggled to keep Aaron Judge healthy. They need a backup catcher. They're probably going to need a corner outfielder, and that's just adding the pieces to make them a solvent team going forward. Now, if they really want to push themselves into a contender status, sure they have Cole, sure they have Rodon at the 1-2 spot in that rotation, but Rodon's been injured so far this year. We'll see if he's able to stay healthy the rest of the year. Judge has missed time a couple of times so far now this year. Are they able to keep him healthy the rest of the year? It's a lot of question marks around that New York Yankees organization, which is why going after a rental, as good of a player as Shohei Ohtani is, I'm not sure that's the right move from an organizational standpoint. We got another one coming out tomorrow as well, centering around the San Francisco Giants. Both of these two teams are going to finish third and fourth in the sweepstakes for Shohei, just because I don't think they're going to want to part with the prospect capital necessary to bring in Shohei. For the Giants, it's pretty much going to gut the top of their farm system just like it would for the Yankees, yet they're in a much worse position than the Yankees are. They're in a position where if they don't win this year, they will not be able to retain Shohei Ohtani, and they will have gutted their farm system. That's a no-win situation all the way around. I know you always have to, think with, that things are going to work out for your team, but at a certain point you got to realize, hey, we're a wild card team. Maybe if we add a piece here or there around the periphery, we're better off than gutting our farm system for a rental. And if things don't work out, then we lose them for nothing in the offseason. So Giants, I think for that reason alone, might be able to put a package around Luciano, the shortstop, might be able to put a package around Harrison. But beyond that, they really don't have much to offer in a trade for a guy like Shohei Ohtani. That leaves the Texas Rangers and the LA Dodgers as the teams with the most likely chance to bring in a guy like Shohei this year. Now, this offseason, brand new ballgame. Most of those other teams out there that aren't even in postseason contention this year could go after Shohei. We're talking about guys like the New York Mets. We're talking about the San Diego Padres. We're talking about the Chicago Cubs. And then you add all the other contenders to the mix that could go after Shohei. The New York Yankees, the LA Dodgers, the San Francisco Giants, the Texas Rangers. That's when the market really opens up for all those other teams. So maybe a team wants to go out there and bring him in to let him get used to the culture, see if he can win a championship there, and really convince Shohei to sign there with 2 months more time to negotiate than any other team is going to have. I know he's going to go into free agency anyway. He's going to want to see where his best spot is for his future after the season, but getting that 2-month audition has more value for some teams than others. The Dodgers, for instance, they could part with 4 of their top prospects in their system, bring in Shohei, see if he likes winning there, all that kind of thing. He's already used to playing in LA, so he knows what it's like to live there. But a team like Texas, who has been willing to spend money and spend the last 2 off seasons, maybe they add one more horse to the to that top of that rotation, add one more big time bat to that lineup anyway. Shohei Ohtani certainly would do both for them this year. But let him get used to playing in Texas, winning in Texas, since this is the first time Texas has been competitive pretty much since since Shohei Ohtani was a rookie with the LA Angels. It's been that long since Texas was competitive anyway in the American League West. So we'll see what happens here at the deadline. Those 2 teams probably the most likely for Shohei if he is moved. But the market isn't all about Shohei Ohtani this year. We're talking about guys as well that are available here at the deadline, like Jeimer Candelario from the Washington Nationals, kind of a corner bat, somebody who can play first, third, maybe a corner outfield spot if you had to press him into service there. Probably a DH on most of the lineups out there. But thinking about what teams would like a guy like that, somebody who has a DH spot. Say the Rangers decide we don't want to spend the prospect capital to go out there and bring in Shohei Ohtani. We want to add some consistent production at our DH spot. Candelario could be the fit for them. Candelario could also be a fit for the New York Yankees, solve some of their third base issues, some of that lineup consistency issues that they've had. So we'll see what happens there. As for Tommy Pham, probably more of a fourth outfield option. A lot of teams out there could use some speed, some versatility with their lineup as well. Whether they like to platoon or not, Pham has had his successes and failures over the last couple of years. But he's a consistent postseason performer. We saw him perform anyway with the San Diego Padres last year, I believe. And we'll see what happens this year. Andres, the next week for all three teams is very tough. Toronto has Dodgers, Angels, Baltimore, Yankees, Mets, Rays, Baltimore, Red Sox, Braves, and Giants. That's why the Yankees have a chance of the wild card. The next 2 weeks is why they have a chance of the. I get it, Andres. You're really hoping the Angels can push their the foot down to the the accelerator, but I just don't think they've got enough. I mean, even looking at what they could trade, say they decide to keep Shohei, they want to add here at the deadline. What do they need to add? First and foremost, I would look for a starting pitcher. Second, I'd look for another bullpen piece. Say you get those two. You trade out Joe Adell, some other pieces, etc. Mickey Moniak certainly has played well for you so far this year. Say you stay healthy, and Shohei's able to stay healthy. Best case scenario, say you win a wild card spot. Are you beating a team like Baltimore? Are you beating a team like the Rays? Are you beating a team like the Rangers? Are you beating a team like the Astros once you get into the postseason? And that's assuming you get that final wild card spot. Or say you even get all the way up to the first wild card spot. Even with the additions that they could make around the edges of that roster, I think it's still complete roster mismanagement by what the Angels have already done. 2 years ago was the time to discuss trades for Shohei Ohtani. At that point, you could have gotten 8, 9 high-end prospects from a lot of these teams out there because you would have had that contract control. Now they've pushed kicked the can down the road till 2 months left in his contract, and they could still get a pretty penny for him. Not what they could have gotten 2 years ago, but I still think it would be complete roster mismanagement not to maximize that asset instead of lose him for nothing this offseason. Take this year's postseason out of it entirely. Say you get into the postseason. You're not winning the World Series. But say you get into the postseason. You give him a taste of what it's like to be in the postseason. We saw how much winning meant to him in the World Baseball Classic. To say that getting a wild card spot is the equivalent of getting into the World Baseball Classic and winning it, I think you're having a lot of leaps of faith there, my friend. I get you want the Angels to win. I think they'd still have just as good a chance to win even without Shohei, just from the pieces that they could bring in a deal for Shohei. And they could still turn around and add even after they trade away Shohei Ohtani. They could turn around and add some of those pieces you're talking about at the deadline if they moved Shohei. So I just think it's complete mismanagement from a front office perspective to possibly lose him for nothing when you could add 5, 6 long-term pieces, 6 years of club control, high-end starting pitching prospects, high-end position player prospects, and not bring in somebody else. What would it take to get a guy like Snell? Certainly a lot less than what it would take to get a guy like Shohei Ohtani. For Blake Snell, you're probably talking about, I don't know, it's a rental, so it's a little tougher. We haven't seen the rental starting pitching market really develop yet. We still haven't seen what the asking prices are for these guys. But what would I give up for him? Probably 2 or 3 prospects. As to the quality of those prospects, just depends on what the market dictates. Right now, there seems to be a lot of starting pitchers available, but the starting pitching market is going to be hot. So you're talking about probably a top 100 guy, maybe a top 200 guy, and a lottery ticket is ultimately what it could take to get a guy like Blake Snell this year. Or a guy like Josh Hader might go for a little bit less, maybe a top 200 guy and a lottery pick, or a lottery ticket anyway from a prospect perspective. That could be what it takes to get Josh Hader. That's what I'm talking about, though. You have a chance to really maximize a guy like Shohei Ohtani, trade him, add a guy like Snell, or add a guy like Hader, or any one of these other starters, Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito, etc., Marcus Stroman. I just think it's complete mismanagement by the Angels front office not to move him, even if they decide to buy here at the deadline. Got a little note here on Hoskins. Let's see what that is. We talked a little bit about his health. Let's see. He's traveling with the Phillies for the remainder of the season. Still hoping for return. So really nothing definitive on Rhys Hoskins. So it sounds like Harper is probably going to be their first baseman, at least for the rest of this season, unless Hoskins does come back. So we'll see what happens there. Couple of moves. Soroka goes down to the minors. Guerra goes down to the minors today. Haven't really seen too many moves anyway as of yet, but I believe over the next week you're going to see probably in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 trades just in the next 7 days. So keep your eyes peeled. We're going to see a lot of trades start to percolate, and then on deadline day, we'll see how many trades we ultimately get. I'm expecting probably in the neighborhood of 10, maybe more trades on deadline day, maybe 15 trades. We're going to see a lot of lower level trades as well, back end relievers, prospect type trades as well, and then you could see some of these selling teams decide to trade some prospects for other prospects as well, prospect for prospect type trades. So keep your eyes peeled for the deadline. Appreciate you guys joining us once again. In case you guys missed our announcement earlier today, we will be live every single day for you guys up until the deadline at 8:30. So make sure you guys join us. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll kind of mess around with the trade simulator tomorrow. Hopefully we'll have a trade to announce tomorrow as well. Check out our videos that we'll be posting out tomorrow. Probably got 4 or 5 already filmed for you guys. They will be coming out tomorrow as well. But appreciate all the support. Appreciate all the feedback. Andres, I understand you want your Angels to win. I'm pulling for you. I'm not an Angels fan myself, but baseball is a fun game. I want to see all these fan bases have a good, fun deadline, and hopefully you're right. Hopefully the Angels finally get there and finally end their streak of not getting into the postseason at least. That would be a successful season, in my opinion, for the LA Angels. Just like the Rangers, a successful season for them to begin the year would have been making it to the postseason. Right now, Rangers obviously have their sights set a little bit higher. Angels right now still have that same goal. They want to make it to the postseason, and they have a question of Shohei Ohtani. What do they ultimately decide to do is going to basically dominate most of the sports talk around baseball for the next week and a half. But appreciate all the feedback, all the support you guys have given us. Thank you again for joining us. JG, Sarah, appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys tomorrow night. But thank you guys, and y'all have a great evening.